The late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello, you're with GB News. I'm Polly Middlehurst. In a moment, headliners. But first, let's bring you the top stories tonight. And survivors of the Manchester Arena bombing say on the night of the attack, they felt as if they'd been left to die. That as a highly critical inquiry found there were significant failings by the emergency services. The victims' families have described the multi-agency response as catastrophic, saying it showed the system was truly broken and needed a complete overhaul. 22 people were killed and hundreds more injured during an Ariana Grande concert in 2017. Solicitor Kim Harrison, who represented 11 families during the inquiry, says almost everything that could have gone wrong that night did.
12 years after 7/7, the same things went wrong again at Manchester Arena. The complete and utter failure of the government and the emergency services to learn those lessons and implement them on a national level is wholly unacceptable. This must never happen again.
Well, Greater Manchester Police has apologised unreservedly for the failings of the emergency services.
Beyond the selflessness and professionalism of so many of our frontline staff, it is also clear that our coordination of the response to this atrocity was poor. We had failed to plan effectively, and the execution of that which was planned was simply not good enough.
Well, the other big story today, the Bank of England has warned there's a tough road ahead for the UK as it raised the interest rate for the 8th time in a row to tackle soaring inflation. The base rate is going up from 2.25% to 3%, which is the single biggest rise in more than 3 decades. Downing Street has said there'll be difficult choices to come on tax and spending following the hike. The bank says the country's on course for its longest recession since the 1920s. 2 charities have threatened legal action against the Home Secretary over conditions inside a migrant holding centre. Detention Action and Bail for Immigration Detainees have both written letters to the Home Office over what they call the unlawful treatment of people held at the Manston migrant facility. Suella Braverman visited the site in Kent today, as well as the other Western Jetfoil Immigration Centre, after increasing pressure over the migrant crisis. Downing Street says 1,000 migrants have been relocated from Manston since Sunday. And Israel's former leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his right-wing alliance have won back power with a clear majority in state elections. The country's election committee said Mr Netanyahu's Likud party won 64 of the Knesset's 120 seats, ending a political stalemate that's led to 5 elections in less than 4 years. Israel's outgoing Prime Minister, Yair Lapid, has tonight conceded defeat and congratulated his opponent. Mr Netanyahu is due to appear in court on Monday on corruption charges, all of which he denies. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where now it's time for headliners.
Hello, I'm Andrew Doyle and welcome to Headliners, where I'll be taking you through Friday's newspapers. Joining me tonight are 2 top comedians, Leo Kearse and Simon Fanshawe. But first, let's take a look at Friday's front pages. We're going to start with the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail leads with "What on earth has happened to our 999 services? Manchester bomb victims' families condemn failings of emergency crews." The Telegraph runs with "Hunt set to launch capital gains raid. Savers, landlords and entrepreneurs face tax in autumn statement as Chancellor tries to plug a £50 billion hole in public finances. And the front cover of the Eye now. Britain faces longest ever recession in toxic shock. 5 million face new tax on savings as Chancellor Jeremy Hunt targets dividends. The front cover of The Guardian leads with failed at every stage. This is going to be a recurring theme tonight. We're going to come to this in just a moment. The family's anger at the arena bomb response. And also a story there, asylum seekers' shock at being abandoned in capital. We're going to get to that one as well. Financial Times is leading with Bank of England takes dovish stance despite biggest rate rise for 30 years, as opposed to the hawkish stance from American banks. And we're going to go to the Mirror now, which reads, Safi fought, but she was let down. That, of course, is the poor girl who was killed at the arena bombing in Manchester. The Times leads with bank rates rise to head off spiralling inflation and country facing longest recession since 1920s. And also they are covering on the front cover there what they describe as the chaotic response, which cost 2 lives at the arena bombing. And finally, Daily Star. What's this nonsense? Rise of the GIMP posters. Apparently, police think there's an army of GIMPs on the loose. I think that's just Camden, isn't it? Anyway, those are your front pages. And we're going to kick off with the front page of The Guardian now. A very sad story. This is the Manchester Arena inquiry. Leo, what have they found?
Yeah, so this is an inquiry into the Manchester Arena suicide bombing that happened some years ago. So the family of a man who would have probably survived had he not been left to bleed to death by the emergency services said he'd been totally failed at every stage. And yeah, it's tragic. So John Atkinson, he was a carer. He emerged conscious from the blast on 22nd May 2017, but he died after waiting an hour and 16 minutes for medical treatment for his severe leg injuries and having a heart attack.
And just 28 years old.
Just 28 years old. I mean, and obviously a lot of the victims were very young.
But
There's another victim who could have possibly been saved. 8-year-old Safi Rose. So there seems to be huge operational issues here.
Yes.
A series of miscommunications and poor decisions meant that only 3 paramedics entered the arena's foyer that night to help 91 people who'd been injured by the suicide bomber. None of them treated Atkinson, who died, and the fire service didn't show up until more than 2 hours after the blast. So that denied survivors, further first aid. Some people are blaming austerity, but this really seems mainly to be, operational failings.
Well, I mean, it's terribly sad, and this is actually featured on most of the front covers today, and we'll probably see a couple of those in a second. But Simon, one never likes to blame emergency services. They're doing an incredible job, difficult circumstances. But this report, this inquiry has found that there were failings.
Well, no, I think Leo's right. I mean, the failing appears to be at the planning level. I mean, the fire brigade didn't go because somebody seems to have implied, told them, inferred that it was a mobile terrorist attack. So in other words, there was a bunch of guns and there were people around.
So communication issues.
It wasn't. I mean, that's an extraordinary phase. So what happened to the... And the other thing that's kind of peculiar is that one of the people involved in it had the wrong phone number and all these kind of things. You just think, well, that is just poor planning. I mean, I imagine that there is something about levels of investment, because presumably if you don't invest enough, you don't train enough, and if you don't train enough, you don't do these things properly. But the idea of a single bomber, I mean, that's not an untoward
it's
thing.
Something that can be anticipated.
That's something that you should have thought. Yeah. The one thing that also, though, did stick out to me was just that the inquiry, this Judge Saunders, who chaired the inquiry, did point out how amazing the members of the public were. Well, and it appeared that loads of members of the public rescued people. They carried them on advertising, hoardings and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. But it's a massive failure. But you don't want to attack... I mean, you're not attacking individual fire people and ambulance people. What you're saying is, look, everybody, could you get your systems sorted?
Yeah, I mean, for only 3 people to enter the arena to treat 91 people is, I mean, it seems
it's more than
ridiculous.
That. They didn't have the plans for the arena or anything like that, so they weren't prepared. And I suppose, you do unfortunately have to anticipate these kind of attacks in those sorts of venues these days. That is just something you have to do.
And also in other areas of government, I mean, it's a failure of multicultural policy that somebody with such ideologically driven hatred to the UK can actually foment that hatred and form networks and create a bomb and detonate it at a concert.
But again, I mean, Simon, with that on that point, point. You know, the intelligence services are monitoring all kinds of people, and they can't keep a tab.
Yeah, what's really hard to know about this is you know, it's your unknown unknowns. I mean, there is this claim, and you can't. I mean, we can't verify it because the whole point is it's secret. But what you don't know is the ones they have prevented.
Yeah. Exactly.
There is no doubt about it, though. He was a bit suspicious. He was running around. You look at those posters on the tube. You know, if they look like they're hiding from the police and so on, actually should intervene. And I think one of the things is people ought to just intervene more.
Yes.
Because I'd rather somebody intervened and was accidentally arrested and turned out not to be a bomber than they turned out to be a bomber and actually they were caught.
Because staff at the venue said that they were afraid of confronting this guy. I mean, he's at a pop concert for little kids, and he's you know, obviously a sort of an adult man with a rucksack. You know, clearly sort of out of place, but they were afraid of confronting him because they were worried about looking racist.
Well, that does happen quite a lot. It was similar with the grooming gang scandal in Rotherham. Of course, the police didn't want to apply the law because they were afraid of that. That is an issue.
And well done, you didn't look racist, but these children are dead.
Right. OK, well, we're going to move on now to Friday's Sun, and some great news, impending recession. Simon... This is depressing.
This is depressing. This is the longest recession that's being predicted. It's the longest recession in 100 years. I mean, the good news, I think, is the return to the Roaring Twenties. Hurrah!
Just to be clear,
you know, we're back to dancing to Charleston. We're back to lock-ins until 4 in the morning.
I think it's the Weimar Republic.
Yes,
that's what we're back to. It's not the good part of the 20s. It's the
Oh,
slide.
I think you're being a bit pessimistic, Leo.
So
That's
just
typical.
Clear,
that is. No, we're back to feathers in the hair.
They're not saying that the recession will last 100.
They're not saying.
They're saying it's the biggest recession in 100 years.
What I find difficult confusing about this is it takes me back to when I was a kid and you had to do maths classes. Because if you look at it, you know, what's happened is that interest rates are down.
Yes.
Up, sorry, beg its pardon. The dollar, the pound against the dollar is down.
Yeah.
You know, house prices are up, but people's savings and earnings are down. You know, inflation is up, you know, and that results in the economy going down by 2.9%. The thing that it reminds me of, do you remember those problems you used to have at school when they used to say the hot tap runs at 15 gallons a second. The cold tap runs, how many apples does it take to fill the bath? Do you remember this ridiculous set of connections, which I never understood? It's like a Heath Robinson kind of thing, the economy, and I don't know how anybody's going to control it.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I'm always comforted by is that leading economists always say that economists always get their predictions wrong. It's one of the things you just can't predict. I mean, they're saying...
never agree.
They don't agree. And they're saying that this recession is going to kick in at the end of the year and last, you know, well, a long time. But could they be wrong, Leo?
Possibly. I mean, we're in kind of uncharted territory economically because the inflation seems to be decoupled from interest rates, which is interesting. So, I mean, some countries, I think Japan is sort of running an experiment, in Turkey as well, running an experiment where they're not raising interest rates to bring down inflation, which I don't know, but that could precipitate a real slide into Weimar-style hyperinflation.
I mean, let's not catastrophize too much.
But there are two things about this, and one is there's an idea that the economy then just sort of takes on a life of its own and it just does things.
Yeah.
But actually, anybody who's run a business or whatever, when you've got a thing called a risk register, what you do is you look for the risks, and then you look what you can do. And it's only when those things don't work that you then kind of go into... So in other words, there are things that could work, and we could go on trying things that work. The thing that really gets me about this is the government is behaving as if somebody else created this. They go, oh, we've got this 50 billion hole in the public expenditure. And you go... Yeah, no, you created some of that, by the way, a few weeks ago.
I mean, there are
by freaking out the market.
Yes,
and
well,
creating
there's
this
global
chaos.
Considerations as well. I mean,
there are, of course, global considerations. I understand Ukraine. I understand all that. Of course there is. None of us knew Ukraine was the wheat basket of Europe, did we?
But that's
none of us knew as we were having our cocoa pops in the morning.
I've seen Ken Clarke, former Chancellor Ken Clarke, say, "Oh, this is because of Brexit. You know, I warned you about this regarding Brexit." It's like all the countries that stayed in Europe are also having high inflation, having economic distress.
Everyone wants to blame their own political bugbear, don't they?
Yeah.
But surely the point is, as Simon raises, Leo, surely it is the point that we, as what is it, the 5th largest economy in the world, should be able to withstand a conflict going on across the other side of the continent without our economy collapsing.
It's not hugely caused by Ukraine. I mean, some inflation, some food inflation, and obviously energy price inflation is linked to that.
Yes.
But it's not entirely caused that. Like China, we're in trade wars with China. Supply chains are gunked up all around the world. We've printed just an insane amount of money.
Quantitative easing.
Zimbabwe-nomics. You know, so
that's it, Simon. It's a concatenation of various things.
It is a concatenation of various things. But it wasn't helped a few weeks ago. I mean, not trying to be party political. It really wasn't helped by two people running an ideological view of the economy rather than having a practical view of the economy. Well, even if it was incorrect, I wouldn't have minded if it was based on, like, oh, we listened to advice and then we took that advice. What they did was, we listened to you, go away, we're going to do that.
Well, we've got to move on now to Friday's Guardian. The pressures on Keir Starmer regarding taxes, Leo. He's got to have a plan, hasn't he? Because he's probably going to be the next Prime Minister, let's be honest.
Yeah, and we don't know if that's going to be at the next general election or next week. So the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, is under pressure from campaigners, unions and his own MPs to set out plans for wealth taxes on the richest people in society.
Well, it's meant to be a left-wing party, come on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really off tack for Labour. But some of the comments, so John Trickett, the Labour MP for Hemsworth in West Yorkshire, said that it's a scandal that the wealth and assets of the super rich are not taxed in the way that income is. And he says, with the Tories planning another age of austerity, it's time to promote a tax on the shares, stock, property and capital of the super rich. I've got a couple of issues with this. Super rich people are global people. If they are going to pay too much tax in the UK, they'll move to somewhere where they don't pay too much tax. Also, super rich people are actually really good at allocating capital. They're much better at allocating capital than the government is. That's how they got rich. Elon Musk will allocate money far better than any government programme. That's why we should let Elon Musk keep his money. He'll spend it very wisely, Simon, and generate wealth.
Is this true, Simon? Because I always hear this, that the super rich will leave if you tax them too much. But is that actually the case?
No, it's not. I mean, look, there's a debate about this, and there's an argument that says if you tax the very rich, they will move or they'll find ways around it. They will, to some extent. I think the real discussion, actually, is not whether it's the rich or the poor that you tax. The real discussion is that you boil up dissent and unhappiness amongst people who pay income tax if they think, and if it's the reality is, that people who've got huge assets don't get those assets taxed at the same rate. So income tax goes between 20 and 45%. Capital gains tax is 10 or 12 or whatever it is at the moment. So arguably what you would do, there's 2 or 3 options, aren't there? The normal ways you raise money through tax, you get income tax, VAT or national insurance, OK? What you can also do is you can do 2 things with asset taxes. You can do a one-off windfall tax, which is quick, it's easy, and actually, curiously, quite a lot of people are in favour of it. But you could do it on assets.
Land value tax?
Well, that would be another one. But those things are taxing assets at the same rate. Actually, I think would serve a political purpose. And it's interesting that Hunt has said today that that's what he's going to do, because I think the thing is, they know they're not going to be the next government. What they're now doing is they've got to make a gesture that they're doing something about the economy. What they're trying to do is box Starmer in.
Yeah. Well, what the Tories have done for the last 12 years is whenever Labour come up with an idea that's popular, the Tories just steal it. So that's, I mean,
But if you remember back to '97, of course, that was one of Blair's, clever and Brown's cleverest things, was to say, we will stick within the Tory spending limits. What we'll do is reallocate priority within them.
But can I ask you, Leo, can I ask you a moral question here? So this article talks about the ranks of the ultra-rich, the global ultra-high net worth individuals.
Cool guys.
Those are people who have got more than 50 million, cool guys you can call them, more than $50 million. And that's gone up exponentially over the past year. There are now 218,000 people within that category.
Yeah.
Does anyone need £50 million?
Yeah, you do. If you're going to buy a yacht, you need at least £50 million. So obviously people need it. But taxing, I'm serious, taxing investments, taxing people's capital, that's going to restrict economic growth, because these people are very good at allocating their capital. What you need to do is tax land value. Land, people don't put effort into the land to make it generate wealth. It sucks. Like the people who own chunks of land in New York are sucking the wealth out of the city.
Well, a classic example is when you've got a bit of farmland, and if it's worth X, Y, Z as farmland, and if you can sell it with planning permission, obviously it's worth X, Y, Z times, whatever, because of the value of the houses. You're absolutely right. There's been plans for taxing land since the 20s. I mean, these have been long.
We need to bite the bullet.
And we do need to bite. But
rentier capitalism is actually pretty toxic, and I think we can tax it without harming any economic
But I still think you're not right about the fact that they necessarily allocate capital better.
OK, we're going to move on to Friday's Times now. Migrants could be in for a payout following their detention at Manchester. Simon, you've got this one.
Well, the headline is migrants get £6,000 payout of alleged unlawful detention at Manston. To be honest, I think that the headline's meretricious. I mean, yes, they could get that as a result of an action, but actually what's happening is that there's a charity called Detention Action. And also, it's interesting to me that the PCS, which is the union that represents the border force officers, who in I don't know any, but I mean, in the popular imagination, I would not say they were kind of huge radicals. If anybody's going to be a border force, I imagine they're in favour of a decent immigration policy, otherwise they wouldn't do that job.
Yes.
They also are concerned that what this is about pressuring the Home Office to do something. The problem with this, as far as I can understand it, is that actually the number, for instance, if you look at asylum seekers, it's pretty stable. What's gone up hugely is the backlog. It's the failure to deal with it properly.
Well, and it's the cross-channel.
But the other thing is that 60% of asylum seekers who apply are accepted. So the vast majority of asylum seekers are genuine.
We need to tighten the rules up a bit.
Because actually the numbers themselves, we have international obligations which we ought to stick by. That's number one, and that's fair.
But
the number of asylum seekers is not...
But if that's the case, Simon, how can it be the case that we have 4,000-odd migrants being housed in a facility designed for 1,000? How is it the case that we're dumping migrants at Victoria Station, as happened the other day, just leaving them to fend for themselves?
Because it's a very, very badly and under-resourced policy. And if it was done... And also, if we worked more to break the gangs that are bringing people over and so on and so forth. I'm not suggesting that you should just open the borders. I mean, I absolutely think you should have a decent immigration policy. It should be properly and efficiently run, and you should not close the borders. But we shouldn't be talking about numbers.
Leo, can I ask you, though, about
immigrants do contribute to the economy, and we know.
Simon's just talked there about this idea that we should tackle the criminal gangs.
Yeah.
But whenever, like Priti Patel or Suella Braverman has said, that's what they're trying to do, is to dissuade the criminal gangs from exploiting people. They're called racist and all sorts of things. So,
absolutely.
But it is important.
And various groups and courts strike down any attempt to solve the issue. I mean, Australia solved...
They try and do it in an unlawful way.
No,
that's
they don't.
What courts do.
What do you think
they
laws
look
are?
at the laws and they say they're unlawful.
That's an absolute nonsense. This is, I mean, a lot of this, we've got a whole system. I mean, if the laws are stopping it, then the laws need to change. We've got a whole system. We've got legal aid-funded lawyers ensuring that these asylum seekers get their compensation. Every point of the...
With the greatest respect, Leo...
We're getting juiced. We're paying £7 million.
Leo, let Simon come back on that.
OK, with the greatest respect, you've got two different questions there. Right. Yes, you're absolutely right. If you think that the laws are wrong, then you need to argue for a different set of laws.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, given the law of the land is the law of the land, you can't criticise the courts for interpreting the law of the land if politicians break it.
The court isn't even in this country. It's in Strasbourg.
No, rubbish. This is a judicial review in the UK. That's what's being argued here.
The Rwanda
you're talking about
different
different things here, because you're talking specifically about the European Court of Human Rights and Rwanda. Which is
but we signed up to something after the Second World War. I mean, that was the point. We signed up to a European
And the thing
convention.
is, once you've got a system, and we see this in other systems, in benefit systems and all the rest of it, once you've got a system, it can be gamed. I know perfectly capable people who are getting, houses...
I'll tell you who's really good at gaming systems. Very rich people are very good at gaming the tax system.
Exactly. Which is what they're going to do. Which is why we
you've just defended.
Which is why we need to make
You've just
allowances.
defended rich people gaming the tax system because you said they could allocate their capital better, whereas you don't like
stay on the topic.
They will.
There's too many threads to this. You're linking back to previous stories. People won't know what's going on. It's too layered.
But this is, I mean, saying this being released now, these legal aid funded lawyers saying, we're going to make sure these cross-channel migrants get £6,000. This is just another advert for men in Albania to say, look, this is another chunk of money you get off the tax.
Finally, to Simon, on that, I mean, if you give these kind of incentives to people, doesn't it just bolster the criminal gangs that we're trying to decimate?
I don't think you have to give an incentive to people to risk their life to get to a place where they think can have a better life.
OK, well, let's move on now and end this section now with Friday's Financial Times, an alleged assassination attempt. Very scary, Simon.
This is Pakistan's former PM Imran Khan. Was shot at. It's a scary video. He's on the top of a bus. He's been doing this sort of round-country tour.
It's reminiscent of
It was shot. Well, yeah,
Benazir Bhutto. It was all over again.
Shot in the shin. Funny enough, I looked it up actually. In the 75 years that Pakistan's been a republic, which since 1947, 45 politicians have been assassinated. Yes. There is actually, if you look on Wikipedia, not a great source of information, I do accept, but there is actually a separate section that says whatever. So look, but the point about Imran Khan, it's bizarre, isn't it? So, you think back to 1992, he captains the Pakistani World Cup, wins the thing, becomes this great hero, he's a charming man, and so on and so forth. And he goes through this extraordinary transformation where he gets in bed with the Pakistan military, which you have to do in order to be, Prime Minister. He then juggles this extraordinary kind of coalition of the establishment and the army. And of course, inevitably it breaks up, it falls out with it. He's now turned into a kind of ranting populist. And his whole theme on this tour, apparently, has been that he was thrown thrown out. Of course, it's a US-funded conspiracy, inevitably, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he sort of turned into this, and then apparently his supporters went and stormed the Capitol, in May or whatever, after he's thrown it. So he's turned into this kind of charmless populist who's going to rampage around the country. But nonetheless, no one should be shot.
Well, of course,
for that.
We should emphasise he's fine.
He's fine.
He was shot 3 times in the leg, I think, is what happened.
So he's probably got a sore leg. I wouldn't say he's fine. If I came into work and I was like, I've been shot 3 times in the leg,
I mean, Leo,
you're fine.
Leo, what I mean is he's not dead.
Get behind that desk.
He's not
dead.
And like I said, this does have echoes of Benazir Bhutto, that image of her on top of the car where she was killed by a suicide bomber. This is something that keeps happening in the history of this country.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's incredibly fractious. And also, at the moment, there's videos on Telegram. I don't know if I can't verify them or anything, but it looks like people are storming army bases. So I don't know if they're trying to overthrow, if this has been a catalyst to overthrow who's currently in power.
I noticed too that his spokesman, who's called, I hope I'm pronouncing this, Rauf Hassan, who is one of his allies, official spokesman or whatever, then accused the government of organising the shooting.
Yeah,
right.
And that's the tenor of the politics.
Yes, well, it sounds like lots of different conflicting views over there in Pakistan, but that's all we've got time for. Coming up in part 2, we have the threat to the future of America from Christian white men, Scottish gender clinics, and free speech on university campuses. It's a headliner's jackpot. See you in 3.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. I'm Andrew Doyle and I'm joined by two wonderful comedians. It's Leo Kearse and Simon Fanshawe. And let's see if we can play nice in this section of the show. Because believe me, if you missed the first part, they were at each other's throats in a lovely, sweet, kind of cuddly way. Yeah. Anyway, Friday's Daily Mail. Leo, if you were in America, would you feel primed for a civil war?
Pretty much everywhere I feel primed for a civil war.
Very aggressive.
You're just an angry person, is that what you're saying?
That's stereotyping my Scottishness. But in America, a California professor and former CIA analyst has said that white Christian men are poised to start a civil war in America. So she's Barbara F. Walter. She's the author of the 2022 book, How Civil War Starts. And she made her inflammatory comments on public PBS Tuesday evening while speaking with the anchor. She went on to say that white men who also tended to be Christian were beginning to see such a decline in their position in the US that they had almost exclusively been the perpetrators of violent extremism in the country since 2008. But has she got a television set? Has she got access to the internet? Has she not seen the last 2 years of sort of violence? And,
well, to be fair, the Black Lives Matter violence was mostly sort of posh white kids.
Yeah, with balaclavas on.
But I mean, my suspicions are pricked by the phrase California professor. Yeah. You know, I think there's going to be a particular identitarian route here. But look, Simon, if she's taken that date seemingly arbitrarily from 2008, she says most of the violence is caused by white Christian men. If she'd have taken it from 2001, the stats might be slightly different.
Well, I think there are two or three separate things here. Firstly, let's be very clear about this. I had a quick look back at the stats, and as you know, I work in this sort of area, and so it's a matter of concern. If you take the Fortune 500, which is kind of the equivalent of the FTSE 100 over here, I just checked, it's just under 90% of chief execs of the FTSE of the Fortune 500 are white, OK?
Yes.
Since 2000, only 150 CEOs have either been women or not white. So, I mean, let's be clear, this is not white Christian men across the board. This is white Christian men, if you're going to take that approach, who don't have any power. It's largely men who feel they haven't got power. I think there's some sense in the idea that she feels that if you feel you're powerless and actually you're being told the whole time by a Democrat Party that actually what matters more than anything else is identitarian politics. So you're always being told that actually black is better than white, that gay is better than straight, and so it goes on. If you spend all your time telling that, and on the other side of the ledger, you spend all your time being told by mad people from the Republicans captured by Trumpism that actually you're being lied to by the establishment, there is a group of people who are feeling deeply disenfranchised. They are mainly poor and they are mainly white. So can I ask you something? And they have some kind of, they feel like they've lost something.
So this is your area, and so would you say, or are you saying, in fact, that sort of what we might call far-left identitarian politics, saying, we need to think of skin colour first and then the individual second, that in a sense is kind of fueling this potential for this?
Well, I frame it in a slightly different way, because what I say is that, it is important to recognise that actually women, black people and so on and so forth, experience life in a different way from men, and they do experience sexism and they do experience racism, and that's an everyday event. It may no longer be an all-day event.
Not if they're getting casted in an advert.
But hang on a second, No, let me just finish the sentence. Let me just finish the sentence. My point being is that there is an experience to that which we need to acknowledge. But the point about that experience is it may describe your life, but it doesn't define your life. In other words, you as an individual have a set of aspirations, potentials, ambitions, and you're different in your religion, your family, all sorts of stuff. So what we have to understand, I think, is precisely not to kind of capture people in these big groups and confine them in these these groups and tell them there's a power relationship.
That's what this study is doing, though.
Well, it does. And what I'm saying is you have to recognise that actually white men in this case, that's not a coherent group, as I pointed out with the Fortune 500. If you're rich and white, you're not losing anything. You're not about to start a civil war. If you're poor and white, you feel like you've lost something because you've been told that you're no longer... And just one last point is to say that...
Because you used to be poor, but now you're poor and you're being told that you're a horrible person and all these people are better than you.
I absolutely agree with you. And I mean, you know, when I spend my life talking about diversity and working with people on diversity, I avoid doing that because what I'm trying to say is that, yes, you recognise the reality where there is discrimination, but you also have to recognise the reality that you're individuals with ambitions
we have
and
to wrap this one up, but just finally, Leo, I mean, there's one point in this article, it talks about the January 6th attack and how that kind of thing is evidence of this kind of discontent among sort of white men.
Yeah.
But is it not also the case that the way in which the Democrats, for instance, described that attack and catastrophised and said it was the same as Pearl Harbor, when from what I could see, it was like 6 men in sort of stag costumes. You know, that in itself feeds this sense of resentment and all the rest of it.
Yeah, after they'd had months and months and months of BLM riots with, you know, small businesses being burnt down, homes, all the rest of it, cars being smashed, and then, you know, there's this Capitol riot, which is being portrayed as a coup attempt. Have you seen coup attempts? They have tanks, they have like missiles and guns and stuff. Like these people literally had like woolly hats and you know, there's little old grannies waving flags.
Yeah, but to be fair, it was the seat of... It was
it was terrible.
It was the seat of the laws and the parliament, and they were deliberately trying to stop an election being validated. It wasn't going to work. It's obviously not Pearl Harbor. It's obviously a different phenomenon. I think my point is I'm trying to give
the most polite.
I think what I'm trying to do is give a bit of nuance to this.
Yes, of course, Simon.
It's important to recognise discrimination, but it's also important to recognise ambition and individuality.
Absolutely.
And you can't capture people in groups because what will happen is they will feel that is being done to them.
Let's move on, although I am slightly concerned that all this talk of civil war could be like a self-fulfilling prophecy because you stir up more sentiments of that kind. Anyway, we're going to stick with the Mail now. This is a term I haven't heard before. Stealthing?
Have you not? Oh,
no,
I have
heard
this.
Stealthing.
OK, the sexual practice of stealthing could now result in an offender going to prison for life in one Australian state.
Can you explain what it is?
Yes, I can. But let's forget for a moment, the life imprisonment seems to me a rather extreme reaction to this. However, it is a hideous and horrible thing. What it is, and 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men who have sex with other men have experienced this. This is taking off a condom while you're having sex without the permission of the person that you're having sex with. Now, my question is, why would you do that? That feels to me like a form of rape.
It's a power thing, clearly.
It's absolutely a power thing. I mean, either the woman is, if it's a man and a woman, you're risking pregnancy, and if it's a man and a man, you could be risking, for instance, unsafe sex and therefore the transmission of disease. I mean, you know, it seems to me just to be the most extraordinary thing. But if these people who'd like to take off condoms do go to prison, I wonder if they'll still be in favour of stealthing when they're in prison.
Well, it's 1 in 5. It's 1 in 5.
That'd be my point.
Is a very...
Are you with me there?
Yes. But that's a very high number of people who are participating in this kind of thing. And I mean, what's going on, Leo?
Yeah, I mean, well, some of it could be miscommunication. There seems to be a lot of, you know, miscommunication around sex. And it's happened to me where, you know, a girl's stuck it in when it's not ready.
I presume you're talking about dinner or something in the oven. Let's not get graphic here. But I mean, I do think a lot of it will be to do with the fact that the majority of men prefer not to use condoms, but their partners may not allow that, and then you get this kind of deception element. Yeah. But you know,
but it is down to consent.
Of course, it is.
And breaching consent is always about power.
But you think life in prison might be a bit.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that's an odd thing to do, because what you want to do actually is give them a punishment and say, actually, I want to punish you enough so you don't bloody well do it again.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't heard of this phrase before. Anyway, we're going to turn on now to Friday's Times and gender clinics in Scotland. Leo, I know you're going to have a few things to say about this.
Yeah, so this is Scottish Gender Clinic staff tried to blow the whistle over the safety. We were talking the other day about Scotland's only gender clinic for children, the Sandyford Sexual Health Hub in Glasgow. So red flags have been formally raised by members of the clinical team over the last 5 years, according to newly released documents that have been released due to a Freedom of Information report. So the clinic is basically Scotland's equivalent of the Tavistock Centre that was shut down in London because it was, it was railroading putting children into gender treatment, and there were, I think, over 1,000 families of children who regretted the process, adults as well. They, felt that they were sort of mistreated, misdiagnosed.
Or the gender dysphoria was simply affirmed. There was no other exploratory therapy.
Yeah, they take an affirmation-only approach. So, and they've been treating children as young as 9 years old, which is just insane. Giving puberty blockers to 9-year-olds. So a 9-year-old presents saying, I think I'm a girl, or I think I'm a boy, and instead of being like, well, that's great, dear. Here's some chewing gum and a whistle. Go and play outside. They're like, okay, let's schedule the surgery. It's absolute insanity.
Simon, can I ask you about this? Because this feels like an echo, as Leo says, of the Tavistock. Because in this case as well, whistleblowers are saying that they wanted to raise concerns, but they felt they couldn't because they would be branded as transphobic. So this feels like it's repeating itself.
I think it is repeating itself. I think it's in a slightly different context, though, which is also in the context of the legislation that's going through the Scottish Parliament, which looks like it will go through, which means that self-ID will be put into law. And my position on that has always been, my problem with self-ID is that actually it's an entirely subjective concept. So therefore it's untestable. So there's a bit in the GRA, for instance, that says if you lie about your self-ID, then you will be punished. But actually it's you can't test whether somebody's going to lie about it. So I think the problem with all this is, and particularly in relation to kids, is the whole point about growing up and understanding the difficulties you have as you encounter the world and trying to work out who you are and so on and so forth. What you need is support to make the right choices. So, there will be a very small number of people, I suspect, who will experience dysphoria to the extent that actually surgery will be something that in the end is a contribution to solving that. But actually the idea that you affirm, and I mean the Tavistock, we go back to that, a bunch of the people who were in the Tavistock have now written a totally self-serving letter in which they say, oh no, affirming doesn't mean one predetermined choice. No, it means exploration. You go, well, it didn't mean exploration.
No, that's a terrible letter.
According to the whistleblowers and the others. So I just feel that what I want is these clinics, and it's reflected now in the NHS and the new NHS guidance. I want these clinics and these practitioners to offer kids the choices that they need to make the right path in their life. That's all I want.
Part of the point of gender dysphoria is, and when you proceed to medicalisation, is that it has to be persistent, that sense. But how can it be persistent if you're dealing with children?
Well, I'm not a clinical expert. All I can say is that it seems to me curious that you get your authenticity by surgery and hormones and drugs. It feels to me like one's authenticity needs to be discovered through understanding who you are as you are in the world.
Leo, can I ask you about this, though? Because, the SNP, as Simon has said, pushing through their sort of gender reforms, they seem to be ignoring the advice from the Cass report. I mean, they've effectively said explicitly, England NHS are saying we need to be a bit more cautious when it comes to this gender affirmative approach. Scotland are saying, forget about it.
The SNP do that with all English advice.
What a matter of principle.
Yeah, on principle, they will deliberately defy anything that comes out of Westminster or anything that's seen as English. The SNP is basically Scotland's a one-party state. There's no real feasible strong opposition in Scotland, and they're really beholden to progressive politics. They think it makes them look kind and look noble and gives them a differentiator to encourage people to want to leave the UK, because they're saying we'll create this wonderful state where everybody has their rights. But the thing is, the phrase transactivism can hide good things and some bad things as well. And I think when you're talking about medicalising and putting 9-year-old children on a pathway to surgery, that's definitely something you need to tread very carefully with.
But how can that be framed as good? I mean, the whole point, surely, of this kind of stuff is it has to be evidence-led. And the evidence tells us that the vast majority of kids who struggle with gender dysphoria or a sense of gender dysphoria will have that reconciled naturally through puberty, right? So that's the evidence.
Yes, but I think that if you're going... I agree with you, but if you're going to argue this notion of self-ID and that this notion of authenticity comes from this idea that you have an identity that you discover, which is yours and you've determined, then in a sense, that notion of the external evidence difference pales into insignificance because you're back to this idea of the true self and so on. And this is, look, I think we need to be clear about this. What's happening in that sense, this idea that it's an identity that you need to discover, that doesn't just happen in relation to this issue. I mean, this is the whitewashing of politics through individuality. And that comes, I think, from neoliberal economics that tells you you're an independent agent in the economy and you can decide where you are. It also comes from the kind of notion of well-being and therapy and the idea that actually all that matters is your own happiness.
Well, it comes from lived experience, this thing that we keep hearing again and again. That's about your truth.
Your truth, but ultimately, I feel that we've lost the sense of the common good. So the idea of the common good is that you argue about things and you reach solutions, and that way, actually, the maximum number of us are happy. So what I feel, this is a kind of ultimate bit of individualism, and I find it's very destructive.
It's the opposite of individualism because it's looking at children and saying, like, look, you've got this dysphoria, or we think you've got this dysphoria. You think you've got this dysphoria. It might just be autism. It might just be the replacement for anorexia or bulimia, or these things that gender dysphoria is replaced. And it's saying we're going to use this treatment to solve it.
OK, well, that's it for part 2. Coming up, we have the UK's least respected accent. Don't worry, Leo, it's not yours.
Obviously.
The benefits of magic mushrooms and Albanian TikToks. Advertising channel crossings. We're going to see you in 3 minutes. Don't go away.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio,
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the final part of Headliners. I'm still Andrew Doyle, and they're still Leo Kearse and Simon Fanshawe. So let's crack on. Friday's Telegraph. And a waiver to challenge trigger warnings at universities. Simon, this is about free speech. What's this about?
Well, the headline says students should sign a free speech waiver to attend university. This is Cambridge professor. It's a guy called Professor Arif Ahmed. I think one of the things that's distressing about this, well, there are two or three things. One is that the point of universities is about discovery, knowledge, investigate. That is the point. That's what universities are fundamentally for. I don't use the phrase academic freedom any longer because I worry that it sounds too much like what you're saying is simply ghastly, but nonetheless I'll defend your right to say it. So I use the phrase exchange of ideas. That what universities need to do is expect to exchange ideas and disagree well. And I have this phrase where I talk about spaces that are safe for disagreement, not from disagreement.
Yeah.
And one of the problems, I think, is that what's arisen is this idea where people were back to talking about the subjective identity that we were talking about before. This notion you feel unsafe.
Yes.
You know, there's a real uneasy equivalence given, you know, people are talking about words are actual violence. And the point about words is actually they're precisely actually not violence. In fact, they're actually the opposite of violence. They are different. And I always think that if, you know, words are actions, and I always think if words were actual violence and actions, then every time you said the F word, you'd actually have an orgasm, and our builder would never leave his house. you know,
I mean, this is interesting. Arif Ahmed, who I know, he has actually tried to set up these sessions about free speech within Gonville and Caius College. I gave a talk at one on Tuesday, and it was fantastic, and the students were brilliant. But the week before my talk, there was a talk by Helen Joyce, and Arif had to smuggle students in because there were too many protests outside. Students were afraid, and they were afraid of being seen there, right? What's all that about, Leo?
Yeah, I mean, peer pressure is huge for students. I mean, you see that when you do student gigs, go to universities and perform comedy, because first ones I did, I thought, this is going to be so much fun. They're going to be drinking, they're going to be cutting loose. No, they're all scared of interacting or laughing because they're all looking at each other. And
they shouldn't be scared of learning or hearing different ideas at a university.
Well, apparently, I read, it might have been in your book, that it's not so much the students, it's faculty members and other people who are...
Well, at this particular college, Gonville and Caius, so after he invited Helen Joyce, the master of the college, someone called Pippa Rogerson, wrote to all staff and students saying this was a hateful, offensive individual, a defamatory letter sent through the university challenge. So actually, Simon, is it not the case that it's not so much the students, it's these academics?
Well, I think what's built up is an atmosphere, and you're absolutely right. I mean, people are at the moment scared to be seen at. It's a bit like, you know, me going to Lidl. You know, don't want to be
with good cause.
No, you know, it's cheap, but really, I don't want to be known for going to Lidl. the problem, I think, is this idea of it's hateful, it's homophobic, it's sexist, it's racist. Yes. The problem with that phrase or that sentence is that it defines the crime, it establishes the guilt, and it metes out the sentence all in the one phrase. And so what you do by doing that is you cut off this core activity, which is the exchange of ideas. So I'm sure students are nervous about it, and I think that it is people who are not prepared to engage in the exchange of ideas should not, in my view, legitimately be at teaching posts in university.
And Leo,
because I don't see why you would do that otherwise.
Because similarly, you know, all these trigger warnings and this idea in this article that's been proposed, a free speech waiver. So in other words, you're going to do an English degree. You sign a thing saying, "I'm not going to storm out if someone gets killed," because that happens in books, right?
Yeah,
so, I mean, surely
killed in the book, not killed in the classroom. You should probably leave if somebody gets killed in the classroom.
Yes, maybe on that point. But don't you think that? I mean, you've had trigger warnings applied to The Old Man and the Sea. They had a trigger warning at one university saying it contains scenes of graphic fishing.
It's ageist as well.
Yes. There's been a trigger warning on an archaeology course about this course may contain bones and human remains. Shouldn't we just stop patronising young people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Basically?
Absolutely. Don't young people want to go to university to be challenged and you know to be a bit shocked? What's happened to young people? They want to be cosseted and cotton wool. I like this analogy from Professor Amber. He says, just as when you step into a boxing ring, you consent implicitly to being harmed.
Yes.
We should punch them in the face as well.
OK, Leo there with a very moderate position as usual. We're going to move on now to Friday's Express. This is about a failure to meet BBC impartiality standards.
Yeah, so BBC presenter Martine Croxall, she made a gleeful comment about Boris Johnson when he was pulled out of the Conservative leadership race that failed BBC impartiality standards during her introduction to the show, in which members of the press and experts look at the main stories of the day, sort of like this. She said, well, this is all very exciting, isn't it? She then added, am I allowed to be this gleeful? Well, I am. And so that's obviously not impartial. But, I mean, the BBC isn't impartial. Is anybody under any illusions that the BBC
Simon,
is impartial?
Is it not the case that the BBC, as the state broadcaster, does have that responsibility?
Oh, yes, it does. And I think it upholds it, actually, by and large. And we'll disagree about this, but I'm not going to sit on another channel. And I'm really not.
What pro-Brexit comedians have been on BBC comedy shows?
No, Simon doesn't want to get involved in this.
I'm not going to sit on another channel and criticise the BBC.
But what can you say about this particular?
What I would say is she's an absolute idiot. And when she talked, about it was taken out of context. No, it wasn't, love. Actually, what you did was completely wrong. Yeah. And the better joke would have been it's the first time Johnson had ever pulled out of anything. But
that would have been the better
That would have been a better joke. No, it was an idiotic thing to do, and it should be moved on.
To a shock reveal from the Telegraph. The least respected accent, Leo. What is it?
It is...
It's Brummie, I'll tell you.
We've jumped forward a bit.
We have jumped a couple of stories there.
The Albanian TikTok.
Is there no production going on in this at all? I mean, Andrew Dawes says he's in control. He's absolutely out of control.
Oh, no, I'm just a puppet.
We've jumped forward.
Are you?
Yeah.
We've jumped forward.
If you're not feeling empowered, you could commit some terrorism, according to a California professor. But apparently we've jumped forward to this non-story. The Brummie monotone is the least respected accent in the UK, academics suggest, with Birmingham natives mocked, criticised and singled out for the way they speak.
Yes.
I quite like the accent. I've got a couple of mates, Maasai Graham, Luke McDonald, they're Brummies.
But it is true,
Maasai's got this great joke about, because he's black, and he was saying that he told somebody he's from the black country, and the guy thought it was a real tree.
Simon, just very quickly, we've only got a few seconds left, but the Brummie accent, it does make people assume that you're not very bright, doesn't it?
Well, what's bizarre, I think, is the Brummie accent, the Mancunian accent, all those accents, somehow makes people think they're working class. Well, all Brummies and all Mancunians are not working class. Yeah. I've got one of those voices. I've got the sort of the middle of the road posh.
Yes.
You know, so I'm not the sort of, ite and a bite.
I wish you did have that.
Well, I always used to say, when I talked to my mother, I never understood a word she said.
We do have to finish now, unfortunately. Thank you to my guests, Leo and Simon. Mark Dolan will be back with headliners tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Up next is the Farage replay, unless you're watching the early morning repeat, in which case it's breakfast with Stephen and Anne.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday.